And we're back and we're talking to Pastor Rhodes. He wrote a wonderful, fantastic book that says, Before the Clock Started Ticking, and I'm holding it up again so you can see what it looked like. Now, before we went to our sponsor, I said, you see a picture of New York and the top of the trees, which is probably Central Park. And by the way, I asked that question on Facebook. Can somebody give me an answer to where this is at? And someone actually did, from California, by the way, said it's New York and Central Park. So that was
Central Park.
fantastic.
Yes.
So what does this picture have to do with the Garden of Eden? We also know that the Garden of Eden didn't look like this.
That's correct. That's correct. Well, New York is a very special place for me. I have been there, spent time there, did some work back east for a few years. And normally authors, when they write, and I'm not talking like I'm an expert or anything, but they normally write draw from their own knowledge and their own experience. And so the idea of bringing the story of the Garden of Eden and the conflict that between Adam and Satan into New York City has to do with the same effort that a Sunday school teacher would face in trying to bring a lesson from the Old Testament, let's say Egypt. When you're teaching that lesson, you now have to bring that lesson into today. And so how does this lesson now affect us today? So that was part of the thought process there. There is some of the story that it also tries to point out again the fact that there was no sin in the world before the breach of time by Satan, and it actually goes into a lot of details, and you mentioned it with New York being the Big Apple, and then the irony of Adam eating the apple, and will Adam eat the apple or will he be eaten by the Big Apple? So it's sort of that theme, and a lot of New Yorkers will appreciate the amount of detail that went into that because it talks about this couple that takes a walk down Lenox Avenue. Well, Lenox Avenue today is Malcolm X Boulevard. But since there's no sin, there's no need for civil rights activity and none of that. So all of that went into the process there.
Wow. Now that had to take a lot of creativity, a lot of imagination. So another question, how long did it take you to write this book?
It took about 14 months.
Really?
About 14 months to now I say that with the fact that 14 months was the actual work on it because but as a minister, if you're doing sermons, even though you're not sitting at the table, you're meditating on it in your mind. So the thought process has been much longer than
Oh, okay.
14 months.
Okay, fantastic. Because I had some people that said, well, it took me 7 years and their book is so thin. And I'm going 7 years. But, it depends on what was happening in those 7 years. But you were concentrating on this. And plus, I noticed that when I was reading some of your bio, you prepared a lot of your teachings. And so you were already in the activity of writing. So now putting this in a package wasn't difficult because you had already been doing that.
And there's an interesting story behind that. Of course, I'm a New York Yankee fan, and I spent some time back east. And we would communicate with some coworkers via email. And when you're writing a novel, of course, it's much different than you're writing a sermon. And so that style of writing, I began because I had to keep up with those guys who would always criticize my baseball team, and you go back and forth. So,
And I read that too, because you gave them thanks. You thanked
right,
them.
yeah.
So, and I was going, now, how does an email have to do with writing? But anyway, let's get back to the questions. Okay, why this subject and why now?
Well, because it's the subject has always intrigued me. The story of Adam and Eve. I believe that much more happened than when God gave Adam the commandment and said, "The day you eat from this tree, you shall surely die." I would hate to get to heaven and then find out that as soon as God told him not to do it, that he went to the tree and he took it, his wife took it and ate and gave it to him. It was that simple. But I somehow I believe that it was much more profound than that. And So that's why I always had this interest in the story. And the reason now is because, well, again, as I was pointing out, that this is a time that we need to promote the Word of God as much as possible. Even though the storyline in and of itself is a hypothetical, and it actually points that out. There are stories within this novel in and of himself which take on, like, for say, the rich man and Lazarus, when it goes into heaven and hell, and talks about that scene there. And so now we need to get the Word of God out as much as possible, and try to minister to this new age, this new generation, because there are a lot of other options now.
Yes, yeah. The technology, I think, has taken us so far, and if we don't do something, we're going to lose that generation. You're absolutely right. So, and it is for such a time as this. There's always that for such a time as this. What is the theme of this book, and what are you trying to convey?
Well, the theme is it's about the fall of the angels from heaven, and also it takes on the story of Adam and Eve, and as the theme goes, it attempts to show Adam in a state of mind where that he is without the knowledge of good and evil, as he has to overcome all of these obstacles, and many of the obstacles that we can relate to. Probably not the one of blindness that was presented in the novel, but ridicule, and there's scenes in there where he's being bullied by his classmates. He has to overcome his own fears, his own personal fears in terms of obedience, and so it is that direction that takes the novel to the point where he actually realizes that, and without giving it away, that it's about a man who is able to discover a resolve within himself that he really didn't know existed.
Okay, so we're down to 1 minute. Time goes fast when you're having fun. Here is the book. How do they get a hold of it? In Las Vegas, we just worked out a deal with Heaven Sent Christian Books. They're on Rancho, or they're on Decatur and Craig, and also it's available on Amazon.com, and and also in a few weeks it'll be on Barnes and Noble. Fantastic. I want to thank you so much for coming in and
Thank
talking
you.
about your book. Now you know you can go to Barnes and Nobles pretty soon, and then Heaven Sent. Everybody knows about Heaven Sent. Thank you so much, Pastor Rhodes.
Thank you.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning in this week, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Don't forget about going to Open Book Radio. Have a great weekend. Thank you for tuning in every Saturday at 2:02 p.m. to Open Book Radio Club, where like-minded people tell their stories. Poets, authors, small businesses, spoken word, and music writers come together as a community. So don't forget, tune in every Saturday at 2:02 p.m.